of Florida, Alan Grayson. Congressman, do you feel like your colleagues even differentiate between the types of businesses and corporations that create forward value by making the transition to the efficiencies we so desperately need, and the spending of money that is a waste of money, a destruction of capital? Does that distinction get made in the debate that exists in our government?
Not enough, and it's just as true for the government as it is for private individuals and for companies. If you spend $1 billion on a bridge, after you're done, you've got a bridge. If you spend $1 billion to feed the defense contractors after you've done that, you've got nothing. And that's why I introduced a bill called the War is Making You Poor Act, H.R. 5353, to draw that distinction.
How do we help more voters, more people in the media, more politicians draw that bright line between capital that is spent for the sake of creating short-term activity, either trading in trinkets, gambling, casino, whatever you want to call it, or the worst-case scenario where we use labor to buy bombs, blow things up, and we're just making money to blow it to smithereens for no reason in the middle of a desert, and actual deployed capital that solves the problems that exist in this country? How do we help people better understand that distinction, or at the very least hold their politicians to better account for their failure to make that distinction?
Well, I think that it's becoming more and more obvious to everyone as time goes on. It just has to be restated until people understand and learn from their experience. The fundamental reason why the economy's been weak for the past 2 years is not only speculation on Wall Street, it's the fact that as of 3 years ago, we'd spent, according to some estimates, already $3 trillion on these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. If we take all of our wealth and we dump it into the sands of Mesopotamia, it's not going to be in America anymore.
What is the level of support you found for that particular bill?
Not enough. In general, roughly 15% of Congress is adamantly against wasting more money on these endless wars. And that's going to have to grow over time. And what's going to make it grow is the public is going to demand that we fund jobs and not wars. It's amazing that we have 14 million people who are unemployed in this country, and we're still spending huge amounts of money, hundreds of billions of dollars, on utterly unproductive activities that don't make us any safer.
If you were to look at the obvious, which is that whether it's the government's willingness to fund a casino for the financial speculators where they are able to extract trillions of dollars while depriving investment from Americans, or a military-industrial complex that's able to get the government to do basically the same thing, except for instead of using the money to gamble, you use it to blow up parts of Mesopotamia. Is it because of the feeling of fear? In other words, does this all go back to the fear from 9/11, and that we're willing to spend irrationally by the billion or trillion to try to placate that fear, even if it means we're going to destroy ourselves in the process? Is that what we're up against?
Well, that plus the power of lobbyists. It was just a few months ago that Senator Durbin said, referring to the Senate, the banks own this place. And he was referring to the banks and their lobbyists. And we have to put an end to that. We have to show that we need a new set of priorities in this country. We need to be number one in health, number one in education, number one in jobs and in satisfaction in life, not number one in numbers of foreign countries occupied, and not number one any longer in defense spending. If that means we spend as much as the entire rest of the world combined, and we're no safer than we ever were.
Now, to what do you attribute the gap between the apparent and meaningful increase in those in this country who appear to understand what you just described, or what you and I are talking about, the rhetoric from our president, which frequently reflects a version of what you and I are talking about, and the massive gap between both the White House's ability to appear to intervene to deal with it, or Congress's ability to act? To what do you attribute the bureaucracy's inability to actually respond to what is an obvious and massive problem?
Well, you know, we all know that Fox and the Republican Party and the right wing in this country feed ignorance. They want to keep us all in the dark, to the point where they brought us to the brink of national bankruptcy in 2008, and now they want to push us over the edge. And we all know that. We all know that it's true. We just have to act accordingly and make sure that we have a new direction. You know, we elected a president because he said there would be change, and that change is a change in priorities. It's a change toward meeting human needs, taking care of ourselves, our seniors, our children, our own bodies. These are the things that we need to concentrate on. As long as there are people in America who are homeless, jobless, hungry, what are we doing in Afghanistan or Iraq?
With all due respect, and I'm quite sure the Republicans will win no awards for any of their solutions proposed, or many of their solutions anyway, proposed over the past 10 years. When I look at what's going on in the banking sector right now, let's go to the specific financial reform fight. I've got a stack of so-called new Democrats that are pushing to reduce, if not eliminate, the Volcker Rule, which would, again, reduce the ability for banks to gamble with other people's money. Dennis Moore, Democrat, Kansas. Greg Meeks, Democrat, New York. Mel Watt, Democrat, D.C. Representative Luis Gutierrez, Democrat, Illinois. I'll add to that shareholder rights and CEO pay. Democrat Chris Dodd changing the proposal to make it much harder for any shareholder to have a say on pay, changing it from a group of shareholders effectively with 3% to a single shareholder who owns 5%, which wouldn't even apply to the largest shareholder of General Electric. Why are the Democrats efforting the dilution of what is already a very weak piece of financial reform legislation, in my opinion?
Well, what you say is true, and it goes back to what I said before about who owns Congress and who owns the Senate. But the fact is that none of that would be possible. None of what they're saying would be effective, except for the fact that you've got 178 sellout votes in the House and 41 sellout votes in the Senate at voting as a block on every single bill and voting no.
So basically, if we had a legitimate conservative opposition party calling out these Democrats for their failure to be a true conservative, stay out of my bank account, stay out of my bedroom, that they would call out the Mel Watts and Chris Dodds for their mediocrity, but instead we are allowed to see those owned by the banks on your side of the aisle deliver mediocrity and diminishment, and the opposition party actually try to offer something worse than that. Is that a fair assessment right now?
Yes, it is, and you know we saw that yesterday with the Republican congressman apologizing to BP. I'm so sorry that you've destroyed the Gulf.
So if we actually,
what exactly was he apologizing for?
No, I mean that's beyond the beyond. Can we? Is the ultimate problem, and then I'll let you go, the fact that we don't have a competitive primary process. So we are not getting the yield of the competition of all the people that may be better politicians, either as a conservative or a progressive of some kind, because the incumbents are reelected 90, 95% of the time. You probably know better than I do. And as a result, that's why they accommodate special interests and don't care about the voters. Is that the problem?
Well, we do need election reform. There's no question about that. But the deeper problem, I think, is that one party in this country is entirely on the take and cares about nothing but tax cuts for the rich.
The problem, as I see it, is that both parties in this country are vested in their own self-preservation without any consideration for the actual aspect of this democracy, at least as represented by leadership. Is that too cynical on my part, in your opinion?
Well, I think the Democrats could certainly improve, and I think what people are looking for right now is a party that represents them, a party that actually delivers solutions for their problems. They thought that's what they were voting for in 2008, and it might still be true. We'll just have to see. We voted for new priorities, for priorities that are humane, for priorities that actually
how about just priorities
help
that
the
are
lives
fair?
of ordinary people.
How about just priorities that
fair.
are not unjust? I mean, we can get into humane, not humane, we'll debate all day, but how about the government that is not explicitly manipulating the environment for the benefit of those who are paying them off for either tax credits and or bailouts and giveaways?
Right. People want justice, equality, and peace. And they're entitled to have that from their elected representatives, Democrat or Republican. It's just that in the case of the Republicans, I'm not too hopeful.
Yeah, well, we appreciate your efforts. I know that you have committed yourself to trying to address and discuss this in public, as you have and continue to do so with me, and I appreciate that. And I know that you and I both know there are both Democrats and Republicans in our Congress who have the same point of view you and I have, just not as many of them as a lot of folks certainly would like. Congressman Grayson, thanks so much. Enjoy the weekend, huh?
Thank you.
All right, time for the dig list on the day. First up, someone forgot to tell Estonia that there's a debt crisis